Dr. Sarah Chen's phone rang at 3:47 a.m., and she knew immediately it wasn't a wrong number. 20 years as an ICU nurse had taught her that middle-of-the-night calls always meant someone's life was about to change forever. She fumbled for her phone on the nightstand, her heart already racing before she even recognized her daughter Maya's voice on the other end. "Mom, it's Dad. He's in the hospital," Maya said, her voice steady but strained. "They're saying he needs a kidney transplant." Sarah's first thought wasn't about Richard's condition. It was about the bitter irony. The man who had walked out on their family 16 years ago, the man who had chosen his secretary over his daughter's science fair and his son's high school graduation, was now dying in a hospital bed across town. "Why are you calling me?" Sarah asked, pulling on her robe. "Shouldn't his wife be handling this?" "Mom, there's more." Maya paused, and Sarah could hear the conflict in her silence. "They've run all the donor compatibility tests. Extended family, friends, even his wife. No matches. The waiting list is 3 years minimum, and they're saying he has maybe 6 months. Sarah sank onto the edge of her bed, already knowing where this was heading. "I'm a match, Mom. The only viable donor they've found." Those 7 words hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of 16 years of hurt, abandonment, and unresolved anger. Sarah stared at the family photo on her dresser, the last one they'd taken before Richard left. Maya had been 12, still wearing her orthodontic headgear, braces catching the camera flash. David had been 8, gap-toothed and grinning, his small hand clutched around his father's. The man in that photo had seemed incapable of the betrayal that followed. Now he was dying, and only Maya could save him. The morning after that phone call, Maya Chen stood in her Seattle apartment, staring at the city skyline through rain-streaked windows, the Space Needle pierced through low-hanging clouds, looking as conflicted as she felt, reaching toward the sky while firmly anchored to the earth. She'd taken a sick day from her job at Innovation Graphics, though the nausea she felt had nothing to do with the virus. Her younger brother, David's FaceTime call buzzed through at precisely 7:30 a.m., right on schedule. At 24, he'd become obsessively punctual, a trait their therapist said stemmed from their father's unpredictable abandonments throughout their childhood. "Did you sleep at all?" David asked, his face appearing on screen. He was in his Berkeley apartment, already dressed in his trademark black hoodie, working on what looked like another architectural model. "About as much as you did, I'm guessing." Maya wrapped her hands around a mug of coffee gone cold. "I keep thinking about that day. Do you remember what he said when he left?" David's jaw tightened. "He said he was going to get cigarettes. Came back 3 hours later with boxes and that woman's car in the driveway." The memory flooded back in vivid detail. Maya had been in her room, studying for a biology test. The irony wasn't lost on her now. She'd been learning about heredity and genetic traits, while her father was downstairs explaining that sometimes adults fall out of love. She remembered his awkward attempt to pat her shoulder, how she jerked away, and the sound of the front door closing for what they all thought was the last time. "Mom says it's my decision," Maya said, switching the phone to speaker as she moved to her kitchen. The modern space, all clean lines and stainless steel, felt too sterile for the messy emotions churning in her stomach. "Of course it's your decision. You're the one who'd have to go under the knife for the man who taught me to ride a bike and then missed every soccer game after I turned 9. Maya pulled out her laptop, opening the folder marked Dad Research that she'd created the night before. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, she'd done what any graphic designer would do. She'd tried to visualize the problem. Spreadsheets comparing kidney donation risks, a timeline of Richard's disappearances throughout their childhood, screenshots of messages from his wife, Catherine, the secretary who'd become stepmother to the children she'd never met. "I looked him up on social media," she admitted to David. "They look happy in their photos. He's got the same apartment, same job at the accounting firm. There are pictures from Catherine's family gatherings, wine tastings, hiking trips. Living the life." He couldn't have with us, apparently. Maya clicked through Richard's Facebook photos, a digital scrapbook of the life he'd chosen over them. But something nagged at her. None of the photos went back more than 5 years, and in the older ones, Richard looked different, thinner, tired. His smile didn't reach his eyes the way it used to when he'd help her with math homework or teach David chess. "David, do you remember if Dad drank a lot before he left?" "What?" "No. He was the designated driver at every party. Always had ginger ale." David paused. "Why?" "I don't know. I was just thinking about that night. Mom had been working late shifts, and he seemed different, anxious. He kept checking his phone." "Maya, please don't tell me you're trying to figure out justifications for what he did." She wasn't. At least, she didn't think so. But as a designer, she knew that every story had multiple angles, different perspectives that changed the entire picture. She clicked on her photo album from childhood, the one she'd scanned during college for a digital media class. There was Richard at her 6th birthday party, grass stains on his knees from playing hide-and-seek. Richard teaching her to parallel. In park in an empty Safeway lot. Richard falling asleep on the couch with David curled against him, both of them covered in David's Star Wars blanket. "He wasn't always absent," she said softly. "That's the worst part, isn't it?" David's voice held, years of disappointment. "If he'd been a deadbeat from the start, we could have written him off. But he made us love him, then left." Maya's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she opened it. "Maya, this is Catherine. I know this is awkward, but I wanted to give you Richard's perspective. He's asked me not to contact you, but I think you deserve to know. He kept every Father's Day card you and David ever made. He has a scrapbook of your achievements, your art scholarships, David's Dean's List honors. He cried when he saw your first professional design portfolio online. I know it's not enough to erase the past, but he never stopped being your father in his heart." Maya read the message twice, then showed it to David. His reaction was immediate and explosive. "That's manipulation! Of course she's going to say that. Her husband is dying and you're his only shot. Maybe. Or maybe there's more to the story than we knew when we were kids. Maya, listen to yourself. Next, you'll be telling me Mom had secrets too." The apartment suddenly felt too small. Maya stood, pacing the minimal space between her living area and kitchen. "I'm not saying anyone's perfect. I'm saying, what if we never got the whole picture?" Her mother's voice echoed in her memory from last night's call. "Your father has always been good at making promises and breaking them. Don't let him break you again." But Maya was 28 now, not 12. She'd survived his leaving, more than survived. She'd built a life, won design awards, traveled to conferences, had relationships that ended with mutual respect rather than betrayal. "I want to see him," she said suddenly. David's silence was deafening. Not to decide about the donation, just to see him, to look him in the eye and understand who he is now, who he was then. And if you don't like what you see. Maya stared out at the Seattle rain, at the fishermen on Elliott Bay casting lines into murky water, hoping for something worth keeping. Then, at least I'll know, and maybe I'll finally be able to let go. The Cedars-Sinai Medical Center sprawled across West Seattle like a monument to modern medicine, all glass and steel and the promise of miracles. Maya sat in her car in the parking garage, hands gripping the steering wheel, engine off. She'd been there for 23 minutes, watching scrubs-clad staff hurry past, visitors clutching flower arrangements, ambulances arriving with silent urgency. Her phone rang, her design partner Jordan, calling about the Henderson project deadline. She let it go to voicemail. How could she explain that she couldn't focus on typography and color palettes when she was about to see the man who'd shaped her understanding of abandonment? "You don't have to do this today," David had said during their morning call. He'd called Every day since learning about Richard's condition, a routine as reliable as Seattle's rain. Or ever. But Maya knew she needed to. The not knowing had been its own kind of prison. She'd researched everything about kidney donation in the past week. The risks were minimal for a healthy donor, recovery time reasonable, but it wasn't the medical aspects that kept her awake. It was the question of whether saving someone's life could erase 16 years of absence. The elevator to the renal ward moved too quickly. Maya found herself checking her reflection in the mirrored walls. She'd chosen professional attire, a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, as if dressed for a client presentation rather than confronting her past. She'd even straightened her typically wavy black hair, a nervous habit from childhood when she'd thought looking perfect might make her father proud enough to stay. Room 512. Richard Chen. The name on the door tag looked surreal in its sterility. She knocked softly and heard Catherine's voice. "Come in." The woman who answered was different from the young secretary Maya remembered from 16 years ago. Catherine was 52 now, her blonde hair showing silver roots she hadn't bothered to touch up. She looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. "Maya," Catherine said, standing immediately. "Thank you for coming. He's been so worried you wouldn't." Over Catherine's shoulder, Maya could see him. Richard looked smaller than she remembered, more fragile. The hospital bed seemed to swallow his once broad frame. Medical equipment surrounded him like a technological forest. Monitors tracking vital signs, IVs delivering fluids and medications. "How is he?" Maya asked, still standing in the doorway. "Tired. The dialysis helps, but..." Catherine glanced at her husband. "Would you like me to wake him?" "No. I mean, yes, please." Catherine approached the bed, gently touching Richard's arm. "Richard? Honey? Maya's here." His eyes opened slowly, focusing first on his wife, then searching past her until they found Maya. The recognition was immediate, followed by something that looked like shame, hope, and disbelief all at once. "Maya Bear," he whispered, using the nickname she hadn't heard since she was 10. "Don't," she said, surprised by the sharpness in her voice. "You don't get to call me that anymore." Richard's face fell, but he nodded. "You're right. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything." Maya moved closer to the bed, studying his face. His skin had a yellowish tinge, jaundice from kidney failure she'd learned from her research. His hands, once steady enough to help her build elaborate Lego cities, now trembled slightly with medication. "Why did you leave?" The question burst out before she could stop it. "And don't give me that people grow apart speech you gave us back then. I need the truth." Richard's eyes flicked to Catherine, who squeezed his hand. "It's okay," she said. "Tell her." "I was scared," Richard began, his voice weak but clear. "I was drinking too much, not around you kids. I'd wait until you were asleep or sneak out to bars. Your mom knew. We'd fight about it." Maya felt her carefully constructed anger begin to crack. This wasn't the story she'd carried for 16 years. "I was diagnosed with depression in my 30s. Should have gotten help sooner, but I thought I could handle it. The job stress, the mortgage, watching your mom work herself to death while I couldn't. I couldn't be the man you all deserved. So you solved that by leaving?" Maya's voice was sharp, but tears were beginning to gather at the corners of her eyes. "I solved it by running away. Catherine was... She was the only person who knew how. Bad it had gotten. She helped me get into AA, into therapy. I stayed away because I thought you were all better off without me. Every time I tried to come back, I'd lose my nerve." Catherine pulled a battered shoebox from under the bed. "He never threw away any of your artwork, every achievement notification from your schools. He even kept the rejection letter from RISD when you applied for that summer program." Maya stared at the box. It was covered in her childhood stickers, ones she'd placed there when it had lived in her closet, full of treasures she'd long forgotten. "You kept this?" "I kept everything. I know it's not enough. I know I missed the important things. Your graduations, David's acceptance to Berkeley, your first job. Richard's voice broke. But I never stopped being proud of you. Never stopped loving you. Then why? Maya was crying now, not caring that Catherine could see. Why did you stay gone? We needed you. Mom worked double shifts. David got into fights at school. I used to wait by the window on Saturday mornings thinking you'd come back to take us to the farmer's market like you used to. Because I was weak. Because I was ashamed. Because every day I was away made it harder to face what I'd done. Richard reached out his hand, palm up on the blanket between them. I don't deserve forgiveness. I don't deserve a second chance. But if you save my life, I promise I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends. Maya looked at his outstretched hand. Part of her wanted to take it, to feel if his grip was still strong despite everything. Part of her wanted to leave, to maintain the clean narrative of abandonment that had shaped her for so long. I need time, she said finally. This is all. It's not what I expected. Of course. Take all the time you need. No, Maya said, surprising herself. You don't understand. You might not have all the time in the world, and neither do I. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. Mom was right about one thing. You were always good at promises, Dad. This time, if I do this, I need to know the promise isn't empty. Outside the room, in the antiseptic hospital corridor, Maya leaned against the wall and tried to process what had just happened. The father she'd imagined for 16 years, selfish, callous, unrepentant, didn't match the broken man in that bed. Now she had to decide if the truth made things better or worse. Maya's mother lived in the same Ballard neighborhood house where they'd grown up, though she'd finally repainted the living room, covering the sage-green walls that Richard had helped. Her choose back in 2006. Sarah had moved back to day shifts after 15 years on nights, a schedule change she'd made for herself, though Maya suspected it was because the empty nest felt even lonelier at 3 a.m. You went to see him, Sarah said the moment Maya walked through the door. It wasn't a question. Mothers always knew. I had to, Mom. Maya hung her jacket on the antique coat rack, another artifact from the life before, when Richard would drape his mariner's cap next to her tiny pink backpack. Sarah moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency, preparing tea in the same chipped ceramic mugs they'd used for 20 years. The ritual was comforting and infuriating at once. How did he look? Terrible, yellow, thin, scared. Maya settled onto the familiar kitchen stool, running her fingers along a groove in the counter where David had once carved his initials. He kept your box, the one I made for him in 3rd grade, with all our stuff inside. Sarah's hands paused slightly over the teapot. He always was sentimental about the wrong things. Was he drinking before he left? The question hung in the air, like smoke from a forgotten cigarette. Sarah set down the mugs with deliberate care. Why are you asking me this now, Maya, after all these years? Because I need to understand. Because I'm considering giving him a piece of my body to save his life, and I don't even know why he left. Sarah sat across from her daughter, studying Maya's face. In the afternoon light, streaming through the old kitchen windows, Maya could see the new lines around her mother's eyes, the silver creeping into her temples, despite regular salon visits. Your father was drinking, not falling down drunk, never violent, but coming home with whiskey on his breath, 3 beers after one, needing wine to sleep. Sarah traced the rim of her mug. I thought it was work stress. His father had been an alcoholic. Maybe you don't remember Grandpa Chen before he died. Richard swore he'd never be like that, but he was. He was getting there, and I was enabling it, working extra shifts to cover expenses while he spent money on therapy he never mentioned, on AA meetings I didn't know about. We stopped talking. About anything real, I mean. Sarah's voice took on the practiced detachment of someone reciting a painful story she'd told before. The day he left, We'd had a fight about money. I found a bill, $200 to Cedar Creek Recovery Center. Maya felt something shift in her understanding, like when you suddenly see the optical illusion differently and can't unsee the new image. He was getting help. He was getting help and not telling me. Do you understand how that felt? 20 years of marriage, and my husband was fighting a disease I didn't even know he had, while I was picking up extra shifts to pay for it, thinking he was gambling or having an affair with Catherine. But he was having an affair with Catherine. Sarah's laugh was bitter. No, he wasn't. Not then. Catherine was his sponsor's daughter. She drove him to meetings when his car broke down, helped him fill out the recovery center paperwork. She paused, looking directly at Maya for the first time. The affair came later, after I told him to leave, after I changed the locks. Maya felt the ground shifting beneath 16 years of certainty. You kicked him out. I kicked him out because I was angry, because I was exhausted, because I didn't trust him anymore. Sarah's voice wavered. Because I didn't understand that mental illness isn't a betrayal. And then he got involved with Catherine. 6 months later. When he'd been sober for 90 days, and I still wouldn't let him come home, when I threatened to file for divorce if he tried to see you kids. Sarah stood abruptly, busying herself at the sink. I was protecting you. That's what I told myself. Protecting you from his instability. Maya stared at her mother's back, watching the familiar way Sarah's shoulders hunched when she was fighting tears. Were you protecting us? Or protecting yourself? Sarah turned, and Maya saw something she'd never seen before, genuine uncertainty in her mother's eyes. I don't know anymore. Maybe both. Maybe I was so scared of becoming my own mother, lived with my father's drinking her whole life, that I overreacted. Maybe Richard would have kept sinking. Maybe having him gone saved us all. Or maybe, Maya said quietly, maybe we all made mistakes. David's key turned in the lock, and moments later he appeared in the kitchen, already talking before he'd fully entered. I could smell Mom's stress baking from the driveway. What are we processing today? He stopped when he saw their faces. Whoa, what did I miss? For the next hour, the three of them sat around the kitchen table, a family summoned back together by crisis, just like they'd been 16 years ago. Sarah shared parts of the story even David hadn't known. David admitted he'd looked up their father on LinkedIn every year, had even driven by his apartment complex once, but lost his nerve. He wrote me a letter, David said suddenly. Last year, when I graduated Berkeley, it came to Mom's house. I never opened it. Where is it? Sarah asked. Still in my apartment. I kept telling myself I'd read it when I was ready. Maya looked at her brother, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. Not as the 8-year-old who'd cried when their father left, but as a 24-year-old who'd carried his own weight of anger and longing. I think, she said slowly, that we all decided what kind of man Dad was based on the worst day of our relationship with him. And maybe that was easier than admitting the whole story was more complicated. So what do we do? David asked. Do you give him the kidney? That's not the right question, Sarah said, surprising them both. The question is, can we live with ourselves if we don't try to understand him before it's too late? Maya felt the walls she'd built around her anger, her hurt, her carefully curated narrative of betrayal beginning to crumble. I need to make a list, a real list, of everything I need to know, everything I need to say, before I make any decisions. We'll help, David said immediately. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. We'll all go together, as a family. For the first time in 16 years, that evening Maya sat at her design desk, creating a different kind of visual project. Not a client presentation or brand identity, but a family tree. One that showed not just births and deaths, but addictions, mental health struggles, misunderstandings, and the complex love that survived them all. Tomorrow, they would go to the hospital together. Tomorrow, she would ask Richard every question. She'd been too hurt or too young to ask 16 years ago. And then she would decide whether forgiveness was possible, whether families could be rebuilt, whether a kidney could bridge gaps that seemed impossible to cross. But tonight, for the first time in years, the house felt fuller. Not because Richard was there, but because his absence had finally become a conversation rather than a silence. The morning they chose for their family reunion, Seattle's perpetual drizzle had subsided into grudging patches of sunlight. Maya, Sarah, and David met in the hospital parking garage, each arriving separately but walking toward the entrance together for the first time in 16 years as a complete unit. "I brought the letter," David said, patting his jacket pocket. "The one Dad sent me." "Maybe read it after," Sarah suggested, but her tone held none of its usual finality when discussing Richard. As they approached Richard's room, Catherine intercepted them in the hallway. She looked even more worn than she had the day before, but there was something like relief in her expression. "He doesn't know you're all coming together," she said quietly. "He's been different since you visited Maya. More alert, but also more anxious. He keeps asking if he pushed too hard, if you'll come back." "Is he strong enough for this conversation?" Sarah asked, and Maya was startled to hear genuine concern in her mother's voice. "The doctor said talking might actually help. He's been so isolated, so focused on just surviving another day, having something to live for." Catherine trailed off, then continued, "I know you have no reason to trust me, Sarah, but I want you to know I never meant to come between you and Richard. It just happened gradually." Sarah nodded stiffly. "Some things do." They entered the room together, and Richard's face went through a series of emotions: shock, hope, fear, and something that looked like coming home. "Everyone's here," he whispered, struggling to sit up straighter. "Don't," Maya said, moving to help adjust his pillows. The gesture felt both natural and strange. Muscle memory from a childhood of nursing scraped knees and soothing nightmares. "We need to talk, Dad, all of us." David took the lead, surprising everyone. "Mom told us about the drinking, about the recovery center bills, about why you really left." His voice caught slightly. "Why didn't you tell us? We could have helped." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "You were kids. I didn't want you to see. Mia's broken." "But we did anyway," Sarah interjected. "Every night you came home too tired to help with homework. Every time you'd space out during dinner. Every argument you thought we didn't hear." She pulled a chair closer to the bed, a movement that seemed to require enormous effort. "I thought you were checking out of our marriage. I didn't realize you were trying to check into recovery." "I handled everything wrong," Richard admitted. "The secrecy made it worse. But I was ashamed. My own father died from his drinking, and I swore I'd never put my family through that." Maya found herself studying the monitors, beeping steadily beside his bed. As a designer, she was used to distilling complex information into clear visuals. But emotions this layered defied any neat infographic. "After you left," she said slowly, "David started getting into fights at school. Like he was trying to get kicked out so you'd have to come back for a parent conference." David's face reddened. "I didn't know that's what I was doing. And I threw myself into school," Maya continued. "Got straight A's, won every art contest. I thought if I was perfect enough you'd come back to see." Richard reached for David's hand, then Maya's, linking the three of them together. "You were both perfect, you always were. My leaving had nothing to do with you and everything to do with my own failures." "But you didn't come back," Sarah said, her voice fracturing. "Not for years. Not until now." "I tried," Richard said. "God, I tried. So many times. I'd drive to the house, park across the street, write letters I never sent. Catherine begged me to reach out, but I was so afraid of making things worse." Catherine pulled out her phone, showing them photos they'd never seen. Richard at their high school basketball games, sitting in the far back bleachers, at Maya's college graduation hidden behind a tree, at David's architecture school exhibition, viewing the work from across the room. He was there for everything, Catherine said softly, but he was too afraid to approach. Christ, Dad. David breathed. We thought you didn't care. I cared too much. That was the problem. Richard squeezed their hands weakly. I knew I'd lost the right to be your father the day I walked out. Every day that passed made it harder to face what I'd done. Sarah stood abruptly, and they all tensed, expecting an explosion. Instead, she placed her hand on Richard's forehead, a gesture so intimate and familiar it seemed to suspend time. You never lost the right, she said quietly. You just forgot how to use it. The machines beeped faster as Richard's heart rate increased. Sarah, don't, she said, echoing Maya's earlier words. Just don't make promises you can't keep. Not again. Maya felt something shifting in the room, like tectonic plates finally settling after years of seismic activity. I want to see the box, she said, the one with all our stuff. Catherine retrieved it, and they spread its contents across the hospital bed. Finger paintings from preschool, report cards, birthday cards with crayon signatures, programs from school plays. Each item was a moment Richard had tried to hold on to when he couldn't hold them. This is my third-grade Father's Day card, Maya whispered. I wrote that I hoped you'd come to my art show. You never did. I was in the parking lot, Richard said. I sat in the car for an hour. I just couldn't make myself walk inside. David pulled the letter from his pocket, finally opening it. He read silently for several minutes, tears streaming down his face. He says he's proud of me. He says he followed all my projects online, that he knows I want to design sustainable architecture. He says he hopes someday I'll forgive him enough to let him see one of my buildings in person. I've designed 3 already, David said, his voice thick with emotion, and you weren't there for any of them. But I could be there for the next one, Richard said, if you'll let me. If Maya saves my life, if the surgery works, if there's still time to be the father I should have been. The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of monitors. Maya looked around at her fractured, imperfect, complicated family, her mother holding the hand of the man who had broken her heart, her brother clutching a letter that bridged years of silence, her father small and yellow and dying, but somehow more present than he'd been in years. I'll do it, Maya said. I'll give you my kidney. But before anyone could respond, she raised her hand. Not because I forgive everything, not because this erases 16 years, but because you're still my father, and we're still a family, and sometimes love means doing something that scares you. Richard sobbed openly then, and one by one they all joined him. Grief for what was lost, relief for what might still be saved, and hope for what could be built from the pieces. 2 weeks later, Maya sat in Dr. Kumar's office at Swedish Medical Center, staring at a stack of medical disclaimers that felt heavier than their physical weight. The kidney donation evaluation process had been extensive. Blood work, psychological assessments, imaging studies, and more questionnaires than she'd filled out for her mortgage. The compatibility is excellent, Dr. Kumar said, removing his glasses. To clean them, a gesture Maya had learned, meant he was about to deliver important information. However, your recent scans showed something unusual. Maya's stomach dropped. Unusual how? You have what we call an accessory spleen. It's not uncommon. About 10% of the population has one. The issue is its location. It's positioned very close to your left kidney, which complicates the surgical approach. Dr. Kumar pulled up scans on his computer, pointing to areas Maya couldn't begin to interpret. We can still perform the surgery, but the risk of complications increases from roughly 1% to approximately 4%. There's also a possibility we might have to remove the accessory spleen during the procedure. And if you remove it, most people live perfectly normal lives with one spleen. But there are infection risks, and you'd need vaccinations, prophylactic antibiotics for certain procedures. He leaned forward. The real question is whether you want to undergo a more complex surgery with higher risks for someone else's benefit. That night, Maya arrived at her mother's house for dinner to find the entire family already engaged in heated discussion. David had apparently received news about a job offer from a prestigious firm in Vancouver, and Sarah was not taking it well. "You can't move to another country right when we're—" Sarah gestured vaguely, struggling to find words for their situation. "Right. When we're what, Mom? Finally having family dinners again. It's kind of late for that." David's usual diplomatic tone had an edge. "I've been planning this move for months. Dad's situation doesn't change my career trajectory." Maya set down the Thai takeout she'd brought, feeling exhausted before she'd even shared her own news. "David's right, his life can't stop because of this. Easy for you to say. You're the one with the hero complex." David shot back, immediately looking sorry for saying it. "Boys," Richard said weakly. He'd been released from the hospital for outpatient dialysis, but was staying at their mother's house, a temporary arrangement. That felt surreal to everyone. "Don't fight about me. I've caused enough family conflict." "Actually," Maya said, taking a deep breath, "we need to talk about the surgery. There are complications with my anatomy." She explained Dr. Kumar's findings, while watching three faces process the information with varying degrees of concern and guilt. 4% isn't terrible odds," Sarah said, but her nursing background colored her tone with professional worry. "It's a 40% increase in risk," David pointed out. "That's significant. It's also still a 96% chance everything goes perfectly," Maya countered, then looked at Richard. "The question is whether you want me to take that risk." Richard's response surprised them all. "I won't let you do it." The room fell silent. "What?" Maya asked. "I've had 2 weeks to think since you agreed to this," Richard said, his voice stronger than it had been. 2 weeks of watching all of you adjust your lives for me." Sarah took time off work. David delayed his apartment search in Vancouver. "You've been driving across town for medical appointments instead of working on that client project Catherine told me about." "Dad!" Maya started, but he continued. "I was selfish when I left. I was selfish when I stayed away. I won't be selfish again. Not with your body, not with your future." Sarah stood abruptly, and they all braced for an outburst. Instead, she went to Richard and slapped him, not hard but firmly across the shoulder. "Don't you dare," she said. "Don't you dare start making unilateral decisions for this family again. I'm trying to protect—" "You don't get to protect us from our own choices," Sarah interrupted. "We're not children anymore, Richard. We're adults who can decide what risks we're willing to take." Maya felt something click into place. "Mom's right. This isn't about you protecting us. This is about whether we want to be a family, with all the messy, complicated, sometimes scary parts that involves." David pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. "I looked up the statistics. You're more likely to die in a car accident, driving to the grocery store, than from kidney donation surgery, even with your anatomical quirk." "Since when did you become a medical statistician?" Maya asked. "Since about 2 weeks ago, when I went down an internet rabbit hole about organ donation." "Did you know living donors actually have longer life expectancies than the general population?" "It's probably because we're screened so thoroughly for health issues." Richard looked between his children and Sarah, something like wonder in his expression. "When did you all become so—" "So what?" Sarah asked. "So together. So like a family." "We've always been a family," Maya said gently. "We just forgot how to act like one." Catherine appeared in the doorway. She'd been staying at her sister's to give the Chen family space to navigate their reunion. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Maya, there's someone here to see you. Dr. Kumar stood in the foyer, looking slightly uncomfortable in the domestic setting. I apologize for coming to your home, but I had news I thought shouldn't wait until morning. Maya felt her heart race. What is it? We got new test results back, and the good news is your specific anatomical variation might actually make you an even better match than we initially thought. The way your blood vessels are configured could give your kidney better perfusion rates in your father's body. And the surgery risks? Sarah asked. Still elevated, but our surgical team has experience with these variations. If you agree, we'd schedule for next week. Any delay and, he glanced at Richard, the window might close. Maya looked around the room at her family, dysfunctional, wounded, slowly healing. David was still planning to move to Vancouver. Sarah still had walls of protection around old hurts. Richard was still fragile, both physically and emotionally, but they were here, together, making decisions as a unit for the first time in years. I need tonight to think, she said. One more night. To be sure. Dr. Kumar nodded and left, and the family settled back around the dining room table. Maya noticed her father looking at each of them with something that approached peace. Whatever you decide, he said, I want you to know that these last 2 weeks have been the best gift you could have given me. The chance to see you all together. Again, to be part of this family, even briefly. Don't, David warned. Don't make this sound like a goodbye, Dad. We've got too much lost time to make up for. Maya reached across the table, taking her father's hand. We all do. That night, alone in her apartment, Maya made a pros and cons list in her sketchbook, but not about the surgery, about fear, about love, about the cost of second chances. By morning, she had her answer. The pre-surgery orientation took place in a conference room that had seen too many life-or-death conversations. Maya sat between her parents, a seating arrangement that would have been unthinkable 3 months ago, while David joined them via video call from his apartment. Dr. Kumar walked them through the procedure with methodical precision. The surgery will take approximately 4 hours, he explained, pointing to a 3D model on his tablet. Maya, you'll be in OR3, while Richard will be in OR5. The moment we remove Maya's kidney, we'll rush it to your father. Total cold ischemia time should be less than 30 minutes. Maya watched her mother's face, the professional nurse warring with the worried mother. What about the accessory spleen issue? Sarah asked. Dr. Park will handle that portion of the procedure. Best case, we avoid it entirely. Worst case, we remove it, which changes nothing about the kidney transplant success rates. Dr. Kumar closed his tablet. Any questions? What if this doesn't work? Richard's voice was barely audible. Let's assume it does, Maya said firmly. What happens after? Typically, we see urine production within hours of the transplant. You'll both be in ICU for observation, then move to the transplant unit. Maya, your recovery is usually faster, 5 to 7 days in hospital, while Richard might be here for 2 weeks. After the consultation, they gathered in the hospital cafeteria, an unlikely setting for what felt like a last supper. Maya pushed limp salad around her plate, unable to eat, despite Dr. Kumar's instructions about maintaining nutrition before surgery. I've been thinking about that night, David said via FaceTime, his phone propped against a water glass. The night Dad left. I remember you were helping me with my science project, Dad. Something about the water cycle. Richard's eyes glistened. You were having trouble with evaporation versus condensation. And Maya was in her room, playing that Norah Jones album on repeat. Do you remember what Mom was doing? Sarah smiled slightly. Paying bills. I was always paying bills that month. I came downstairs, Richard continued the memory, and you had turned the music up so loud to drown out our arguing that Mrs. Peterson next door complained. You'd made hot chocolate for everyone, with the tiny marshmallows, Maya added, the memory surfacing unbidden. David had a mustache of whipped cream. And Dad, you kept checking your phone, David recalled. That's when Catherine called about the meeting time for the next day. The table fell quiet. Even through the phone screen, Maya could see David processing the same realization she was having. You were trying to tell us that night, weren't you? She asked. About the recovery program. That's why you kept starting sentences and stopping them. Richard nodded. I'd practiced a speech. About getting help, about what alcoholism meant, about why I needed time to get better. But every time I looked at you kids, I couldn't find the words. So you left to get cigarettes instead, Sarah said, not unkindly. I wanted to smoke. First, calm my nerves. Then I sat in the parking lot for an hour, calling Catherine for advice. By the time I got home, you'd already decided I was leaving permanently. Because you'd already been gone for months, Sarah pointed out. Emotionally, Maya felt a strange kind of grief for their younger selves, all of them trapped in misunderstanding and fear. We never talk about good memories anymore, she observed. Just the painful ones. Because healing requires excavating the hurt first, Richard said, and Maya was surprised by the wisdom in his words. But you're right, there were good times. Remember the camping trips to Mount Rainier? David asked. Dad would always pack too much gear, and Maya would complain about the bugs, and your mother would smuggle extra pillows in the trunk, Richard added, meeting Sarah's eyes. She'd pretend she was roughing it, but then pull out those inflatable cushions when she thought no one was looking. Sarah laughed, the first real laugh Maya had heard from her in weeks. I hated camping, but I loved watching you three enjoy it. What about the Seahawks games? Maya asked. David would wear his lucky socks that hadn't been washed all season. It worked, didn't they? We never lost when I wore them. That's because we only went to 3 games, and 2 were preseason, Richard teased. As they shared memories, Maya noticed something shifting. The hospital cafeteria faded, replaced by echoes of a kitchen table where homework was spread between dinner plates, a living room where they'd built blanket forts, a car where they'd sung badly to oldies during road trips. The father who had left them wasn't the same as the father who had shared these moments, and maybe the father she was about to save wasn't exactly either one. I have something for you, Maya said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a slim portfolio. I've been working on this since we started talking again. Inside were design mock-ups, a family cookbook with their combined recipes, a photo album that mixed old memories with new ones, even architectural sketches she and David had created together for a future home that could accommodate Richard's medical needs. We're all designing a new future, she explained. Together. Richard traced his fingers over the pages, stopping at a mock-up of a family Christmas card, something they hadn't done since 2007. You made this before knowing if the surgery would work. Hope requires action, Maya replied. My therapist told me that last week. You're seeing a therapist? Sarah asked. We all should be, Maya admitted. I've been going for a month. Turns out abandonment issues don't resolve themselves just because the person who left comes back. David's face on the phone screen grew thoughtful. I've been meaning to tell you all, I deferred the Vancouver job for 6 months. I figured if we're rebuilding our family, I should probably be here for it. David, you can't sacrifice your career, Richard started. I'm not sacrificing anything, David interrupted. The firm was understanding. They said character counts in architecture, knowing how to build things that last. I told them I was learning from the best. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Kumar's pager going off. Surgery was scheduled for 6 a.m. They needed to be here by 4:30. This was their last normal evening as a family seeking recovery. Tomorrow, everything would change again. I'm scared, Maya admitted. Me too, Richard said. Good, Sarah said, surprising them. Fear means you understand the stakes. Love means you're doing it anyway. As they prepared to leave, Maya noticed Her father moving more slowly, needing to rest between standing and walking. Time was running out faster than any of them wanted to acknowledge. That night, alone in her apartment, Maya completed one final piece of her design project. A timeline that started with Richard's departure in 2008 and ended with tomorrow's surgery. But instead of marking only the painful milestones, she'd included every medical test, every family conversation, every small gesture of reconciliation. The line wasn't straight. It had detours and setbacks, moments where everything seemed lost. But it led to tomorrow, to an operating room where love would be measured in more concrete terms than ever before. Her phone buzzed with a group text from David. Dad just texted good night. First time in 16 years. Sarah's response came immediately. He texted me too, said he loves us and is proud of us. Maya stared at her own phone, finding the same message. 3 words that had been absent for so long. I love you. She typed back to the group. See you all at 4:30. Remember, we're in this together. Tomorrow she would give her father a part of herself she could never take back. But tonight, for the first time since she was 12 years old, she went to sleep, feeling like she had her whole family back. The pre-dawn darkness of Seattle felt heavier on surgery day, as if the city itself was holding its breath. Maya arrived at Swedish Medical Center to find her family already assembled in the patient preparation area. Sarah with coffee for everyone, David having driven through the night from Berkeley, and Richard in his hospital gown, looking smaller than ever, but alert. You didn't have to come back for this, Maya told David, accepting her coffee. Yes, I did, he replied simply. Besides, I already asked for the time off. And my therapist, yes, I'm seeing one now too, said witness is important for healing. A nurse named Jennifer checked Maya's vitals one final time, making small talk that everyone knew was designed to keep them calm. Big day for the Chen family, she said with practiced cheer. I've been watching your case develop. It's unusual to see such a positive outcome from complicated family dynamics. We're still working on it, Sarah said, and Maya noticed she was holding Richard's hand, a gesture so casual it seemed to surprise even her. Dr. Kumar appeared with the surgical team for final consultations. Maya, we'll be starting with you in OR3. Richard, you'll go to OR5 for prep. The coordination is crucial, so I want to review the timeline one more time. As the medical details washed over them, Maya found herself studying her family with a designer's eye for composition. David, fidgeting with his phone, but present in a way he hadn't been for years. Sarah, her nursing instincts warring with her maternal fears. Richard, pale but determined, his eyes moving between his children and ex-wife, with something approaching wonder. Before they take us, Richard said, his voice cracking slightly, I need to say something. Dad, save your strength, David started. No, this needs to be said. Richard struggled to sit up straighter. Maya, what you're doing today, it's not just saving my life. It's giving me a chance to be the father I should have been. To be part of your lives again properly this time. You don't have to, Maya began. Yes, I do. Sarah, I know this is awkward, us being divorced, you dating again, but watching you care for me these past weeks, fighting with the insurance company, making sure I took my medications correctly. You're still the most remarkable person I've ever known. And David, Richard turned to his son. I missed so much of your life, your first job, your first apartment, probably your first heartbreak, but I want to be here for all the firsts that are still coming. Dad, you're going to make Maya cry, and her blood. Her pressure is already elevated, Sarah said, but her voice was gentle. I'm not crying, Maya protested even as she wiped her eyes. I'm just... God, I'm about to let strangers cut out a piece of me, and I'm worried about my mascara. The team assembled for transport. Maya was first. They needed to begin her surgery, to time everything perfectly. As they wheeled her gurney away, she looked back at her family. Don't let him die while I'm under anesthesia, she called out. I'll kill you all if you waste my kidney. David laughed, despite himself. That's the Maya we know. The pre-surgery area was a blur of IVs, consent forms, and the anesthesiologist explaining what would happen next. Maya had designed countless projects for medical clients, but being on this side of the process was entirely different. Her last clear memory was Dr. Park, the surgeon handling her case, squeezing her shoulder. "When you wake up, you'll be one kidney lighter and your family will be in our care," she said. "We won't let you down." In OR5, Richard waited through his own prep, David and Sarah taking turns sitting with him until transport arrived. "If something goes wrong," Richard said to Sarah, "if the kidney doesn't take or if there are complications..." "Richard..." Sarah stopped him with a look that was vintage, the one she'd used to get him to stop catastrophizing about their kids' futures. "We're past what ifs. We're in the middle of what is." "What is," David echoed, "is that your daughter is being cut open right now to save your life. The least you can do is receive it with gratitude instead of guilt." Transport arrived before Richard could respond, and suddenly David and Sarah found themselves alone in the waiting room, drinking terrible coffee and staring at each other across an uncomfortable silence. "This is weird," David said finally. "Which part? Your sister donating an organ, your father living in my house, or us having our first real conversation in years?" "All of it." David moved to the window overlooking the city. "I keep expecting to wake up and find none of this happened, that Dad's still just a story we tell ourselves about what went wrong." Sarah joined him at the window. "Grief plays tricks. Sometimes it's easier to hold on to anger than to risk being hurt again. When did you get so wise?" "About 6 months ago, when I started therapy myself. Your father wasn't the only one who needed to work through some things." Sarah paused. "I was so angry for so long, David. At him for leaving, at myself for letting, him at you kids for needing me to be strong when I was falling apart, Mum. And then suddenly he's dying, and Maya's offering to save him, and I had to ask myself, am I angry at him, or am I angry at the situation that took him away from us? Because those are two different kinds of grief." In the OR, Dr. Kumar monitored the carefully choreographed dance between teams. Maya's surgery proceeded with textbook precision, Dr. Park's years of experience paying off as she navigated around the accessory spleen with minimal complications. The kidney looked healthy, pink, and perfectly sized. "Good color, excellent. Perfusion," Dr. Park reported. "We're ready for harvest." Meanwhile, Richard lay in OR5, his body prepared to receive the gift his daughter was giving. The anesthesia team had already established the perfect balance of drugs to keep him stable through the transplant. "Family match," Dr. Kumar announced, as Maya's kidney was carefully removed. "Beginning transport now." The 28-minute journey from OR3 to OR5 felt eternal to the families waiting. Jennifer, the nurse who had checked them in, periodically updated them. "Both patients are stable. Kidney has been harvested successfully. Transport in progress." "What happens if the kidney doesn't work right away?" David asked. "Sometimes it takes days or weeks for full function. The important thing is getting it in place," Jennifer explained. "Dr. Kumar will keep us updated every hour." Hour 3 brought the first major update. Kidney implantation successful. Early signs of function. Both patients stable. Hour 4. Transplant proceeding well. Maya in recovery. Richard still in surgery for final connection of blood vessels. Hour 5. Both surgeries complete. Patients being moved to ICU. You can see them in about 2 hours. When the waiting finally ended, Maya was the first they saw. Groggy but alert in ICU, she immediately asked, "Did it work?" "Too early to tell," the ICU nurse said, "but both doctors are optimistic." "Dad, next room. They'll let you see him in an hour when you're both more stable." David sat beside Maya's bed while Sarah consulted with the medical team. "You did it, sis. The hardest part's over." "Is it?" Maya asked, her voice rough from the breathing tube. "I've been thinking, what if this works? What if we become a real family again? What if we don't? What if saving his life doesn't change anything between us? Then we deal with that when it happens. But right now, today, you chose love over fear. That's not nothing." 2 hours later, they wheeled Maya's bed next to Richard's. Both were hooked to monitors, IVs, and other medical equipment, but they were side by side for the first time since the surgery. Richard's eyes opened slowly, focusing on Maya. "Thank you," he whispered. "Don't thank me yet," she replied. "Start peeing. That's when we celebrate." And whether it was Maya's practical humor or the surgery's success, Richard laughed, a sound that seemed to break the last wall between their old life and whatever came next. Day 3, post-surgery, marked the turning point. Maya woke to the sound of celebration in the ICU as Richard's kidney function tests showed dramatic improvement. Dr. Kumar stood at the foot of both their beds, looking genuinely pleased, an expression Maya hadn't seen since this ordeal began. "The numbers are excellent," he announced. "Richard, your new kidney is working beautifully. Maya, your remaining kidney has already compensated. You're both on track for early discharge." As medical staff bustled around them, Maya caught her father's eye. Without the tubes and machines dominating their conversation, they could finally talk. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Like I've been given a second chance," Richard replied, then quickly added, "Not just with my body. With all of you." Sarah appeared in the doorway with David, both looking more rested than they had in weeks. "Good news travels fast in this hospital," Sarah said. "The nurses are calling you to their miracle case." "Nothing miraculous about modern medicine," Maya replied, trying to sit up straighter. "And a family that finally decided to stop holding on to old grudges." David pulled up a chair, laptop under his arm. "I've been working on something while you two were recovering." He opened his computer, revealing architectural drawings. "Vancouver." "Oh, can wait. I want to show Dad what I've been designing." "David, you don't have to delay your career for me," Richard protested. "I'm not. I'm expanding it." David turned the screen so they could all see. "Sustainable healthcare facilities, transplant recovery centers that feel like homes instead of hospitals. Your story inspired me to specialize in medical architecture." Maya studied the drawings. Clean lines, natural light, spaces designed for healing and family connection. "These are brilliant, David. I got the idea watching you all navigate this place, the way family support impacts recovery. That's my thesis project now." Richard's voice was thick with emotion. "You'd really want me to see your work?" "All of it, including the first official building I design. Think of it as partial payment for the 16 years of Father's Days I missed." A comfortable silence settled over them. Maya recognized it as something they'd rarely experienced, the quiet that comes when people feel safe together. Dr. Kumar returned with discharge planning papers. "Maya, you'll likely go home tomorrow. Richard, if these numbers hold Friday, the timing works well for integrated recovery support." "What does that mean?" Sarah asked. "Family therapy integration with physical recovery." Our social worker, Dr. Williams, specializes in post-transplant family dynamics. Given your unique situation, we recommend weekly sessions for the first month. Maya caught the meaningful look between her parents. "That seems intense," Sarah said carefully. "Not required," Dr. Kumar clarified, "but families that process the experience together show better long-term success rates." "We'll do it," Richard said firmly. "We've already started talking. Why stop now?" That evening, visiting hours found the four of them playing cards in Richard's room, a scene that would have been unimaginable weeks earlier. Catherine appeared in the doorway, hesitant. "I brought your reading glasses," she said to Richard. And Maya, I finished the sweater I was knitting for you, if you still want it. The room tensed slightly, but Maya surprised everyone, including herself. I'd love to see it. And Catherine, thank you for taking care of him these past years. I know it wasn't easy being with someone carrying so much guilt. Catherine's eyes welled up. He spent every single day since he met me trying to make amends, writing letters he never sent, calling numbers he'd dial halfway through. I kept telling him to just reach out. We all made choices, Sarah said. But we're making different ones now. Friday arrived with Seattle's first real sun in weeks. Maya, in a wheelchair despite her protests, was rolled out to the hospital entrance beside Richard, who looked transformed despite still being weak. First day of the rest of our complicated lives, David said, loading their bags. It's not going to be easy, Maya warned. We've got years of patterns to unlearn. Maybe, Richard said, taking Sarah's offered arm for support. But we've got something we didn't have before. A working kidney? Sarah asked dryly. Each other, Maya corrected, and proof that sometimes the hardest decisions lead to the most unexpected grace. As they drove home, all of them together, Maya thought about the design principles she'd learned in school. Sometimes the most beautiful creations emerged from the most challenging constraints. Their family was no different. They were broken, mended, and still healing. But they were moving forward, and that was enough. 6 weeks post-surgery, the Chen family gathered around Sarah's dining table for their first official family dinner since 2008. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Richard's recovery had required him to stay in the house he'd left 16 years earlier. But routine had settled them into something resembling normal. Maya arrived last, carrying a portfolio that drew everyone's attention. Before we eat, I want to share something. She opened it to reveal a series of illustrated panels, a visual memoir she'd been creating during her own recovery. Each page chronicled their journey, the auction of memories, the hospital corridors, the surgery, and small moments of reconnection they'd gathered along the way. I'm showing it at the Seattle Art Museum next month, she announced. It's called Second Circulation. Maya, this is incredible, Richard breathed, studying a panel showing their hands connected around the transplant surgery. The museum is interested in making it a traveling exhibition, she continued. About families, medical crises, and redemption, David's architectural firm wants to collaborate on the installation design. David grinned. We're calling it Spaces of Healing. It's going to incorporate interactive elements where families can share their own stories. Sarah set down the serving spoon with unusual care. My children are becoming famous for our dysfunction. I'm not unsure how I feel about that. Not dysfunction, Mom, Maya corrected gently. Reconciliation. And it's already helping people. I've gotten messages from 3 other families dealing with organ donation and estrangement. They say it gives them hope, Richard looked around the table at the faces he'd missed for so long. I never imagined my failures could become something that helps others. They're not just your failures, Dad, David said. We all had parts to play in this story. Catherine knocked softly at the door. She'd been invited for dessert, a step toward blending their complicated family constellation. She entered carrying a pie and news, the transplant team called, she said. They want to feature your case in their follow-up study. Dr. Kumar mentioned something about publishing a paper on family dynamics in living donor transplants. Maya laughed. Great! Dad's kidney and our therapy sessions are going to be in medical journals. Better than being a cautionary tale, Sarah remarked, but her tone was light. As they shared the meal, conversation flowed in ways that felt increasingly natural. Richard had regained weight and color, his improvement remarkable. Maya's surgical recovery had been textbook perfect, though she still wore loose clothing and moved carefully. I've been thinking, Richard said during dessert, about what comes next, the things I want to do now that I have time. Dad, you're not dying tomorrow, David said. You've got years of recovery ahead. Exactly. Years I want to use differently. Richard pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I've been in recovery meetings since the surgery, not just AA, but a support group for people dealing with medical second chances. I want to become a peer counselor. That's wonderful, Catherine said, squeezing his hand. There's more. I talked to my boss about reducing to part-time. I want to volunteer at the hospital, helping families navigate transplant processes. He looked at each of them. I spent 16 years regretting the past. I'd like to spend however many years I have left being useful to others. Maya felt something shift in her chest. Not pain from the healing incision, but the sensation of space opening up where old resentments used to live. "What about us?" she asked. "Where do we go from here?" "Wherever we want," Sarah answered. "But together, even if that means Catherine joins us for holidays and David video calls from Vancouver job sites." "Actually," David said, "I've decided to stay in Seattle. Partner offered me a position here. Turns out there's going to be demand for medical architecture locally." The table fell silent as they absorbed this news. "The building at Willow Creek Medical?" Richard asked, his face lighting up. "The building at Willow Creek Medical," David confirmed. "State-of-the-art transplant recovery center. First of its kind on the West Coast." Maya raised her water glass. "To second chances, to shared blood, to knowing when to let go and when to hold on." They clinked glasses, water for the recovering patients, wine for the others, and Maya realized she'd been wrong all those years ago. Families weren't just built on the good memories or broken by the painful ones. They were sustained by the willingness to keep showing up, even when showing up was the hardest thing to do. Outside, Seattle's perpetual rain had given way to an unseasonably clear evening. Through the window, the Space Needle pointed toward a sky full of possibilities they were finally ready to explore together. 9 months after the surgery, Maya stood on the stage at the Seattle Art Museum, addressing a crowd that spilled beyond the gallery's walls. Her exhibition, Second Circulation, had grown from a personal project into something much larger, a movement of families sharing stories of fractured relationships and medical reconciliation. "When my father left our family for his secretary, 16 years ago," Maya began, her voice steady, though the words still carried weight, "I thought that was the end of our story. When he returned, dying and needing my kidney, I thought we were just adding a complicated epilogue. I was wrong. We were beginning an entirely new chapter." In the audience, Richard sat between Sarah and David, his hand resting on Catherine's knee. The physical arrangement no longer felt awkward. They'd learned to navigate the terrain of their blended, healed, and still healing family. Maya clicked through digital images of her artwork, visual journals that traced not just their medical journey, but the emotional archaeology of rebuilding trust. One piece, titled "What We Inherited," mapped 3 generations of addiction, abandonment, and attempts at redemption. "Family trauma has a way of echoing through generations," she continued. "But so does forgiveness. And sometimes a crisis, a medical emergency, a moment when life hangs in the balance, creates the opening we need to hear those echoes differently." After her talk, Dr. Sarah Williams approached the stage. She'd become more than their family therapist. She'd become a collaborator in understanding how medical intervention could catalyze emotional healing. "The response to your exhibition has been extraordinary," she told Maya. "We've had requests from 15 hospitals to incorporate your model into their transplant programs. Art therapy combined with family counseling, visual storytelling as part of the healing process." Maya smiled, gesturing to where her family was viewing the exhibition. Richard moved slowly but confidently now, his post-transplant energy remarkably good. "My family became the test case, didn't we? And your success is inspiring others. We're calling it the Seattle Model, integrating creative expression with medical family therapy." Dr. Williams produced a tablet showing Maya preliminary data. Families who engage in creative processing during medical crises show 60% better communication scores and 40% less relapse into dysfunctional patterns. Meanwhile, David's new project had broken ground across town. The Seattle Center for Transplant Recovery, designed around principles of light, healing, and family inclusion, was scheduled to open next year. Richard had been hired as the facility's first peer counselor coordinator. "Dad's actually good at this," David had reported during a recent family therapy session. "He has that perfect mix of authority from experience and humility from his mistakes. Families trust him." Now, as the museum event wound down, the Chen family reconvened at their new favorite restaurant, a small Ethiopian place where they met every third Thursday, a ritual that grounded them without feeling forced. "I got an email today," Maya announced as they settled into their booth, "from a woman in Denver whose father abandoned the family 20 years ago. He needs a liver transplant. She's a match, but hasn't spoken to him in 12 years. She's wondering if our story means she should donate." "What did you tell her?" Sarah asked. "I told her there's no one-size-fits-all answer, that the surgery gave us a foundation for reconciliation, but the real work happened in therapy, in conversation, in choosing to show up." Maya paused. "And I told her that forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's deciding what story we want to live going forward." Catherine, who had gradually become not just accepted but welcomed, shared her own news. "My sister called me yesterday. She's been estranged from her daughter for 5 years. Watching us work through things has made her reconsider reaching out." "The ripple effect," Richard said, a phrase he'd learned in recovery. "Our healing touches more lives than we know." David pulled out his phone, showing construction photos from the recovery center site. "Speaking of ripples, I got approval for the final design element, a meditation garden specifically for families processing grief and reconciliation. Maya, I was hoping you'd create an art installation for it." "The prodigal pathways," Maya suggested immediately, designer's mind already racing. "Winding trails that meet in the middle, showing different routes to the same destination." There, server arrived with injera and shared platters, the communal eating another metaphor for their life now. Messy, shared, requiring everyone to reach across boundaries. "I wanted to talk to all of you about something," Richard said, his voice carrying the weight of announcement. 6 months ago, I started writing about my journey, about addiction, about leaving you all and trying to come back." The table quieted. "I've been working with a publisher. It's not just my story. I interviewed other organ donors and recipients, other families who used medical crises as bridges. Maya, your artwork will be featured throughout." "Dad, that's incredible," David said. "What's it called?" "The Distance Between: How We Lost and Found Each Other." Richard looked at each of them. "But I won't publish it without your consent. It's not just my story to tell." Maya considered this, their private journey becoming public narrative. "What's the message? What do you want people to take away?" "That it's never too late to repair a relationship, that medical crises can be opportunities, that families aren't defined by their failures, but by their willingness to try again." Richard's voice grew thick. "And that sometimes the greatest gifts we give each other are the hardest ones." Sarah reached across the table, taking Richard's hand in a gesture that had become natural over months of shared medical decisions and family therapy. "As long as we're honest about the difficulty, as long as people understand this wasn't a fairy tale reunion." "No," Maya agreed. "It was messier and harder than any fairy tale, and it's still ongoing. We're not fixed. We're just willing to keep working." David raised his water glass. He'd stopped drinking alcohol entirely after witnessing his father's journey, a solidarity gesture that had evolved into preference. to the ongoing work, to the distance we've traveled and the distance still ahead. As they clinked glasses, Maya noticed the family at the next table, a father, teenage daughter, and the father's new wife sitting in awkward silence. She caught the daughter's eye and offered a small smile. Sometimes healing happened in sudden surgical precision, but most often it happened in these smaller moments. A shared meal, a willing conversation, the choice to show up again and again, until the distance between estrangement and connection became just another story about who they used to be, not who they were becoming. 2 years had passed since the surgery, and this time the Chen family gathered not in a hospital waiting room, but in the sunlit atrium of the Seattle Center for Transplant Recovery. The building's grand opening served as the perfect bookend to their unlikely journey. Maya stood before a crowd of donors, recipients, and families, introducing the dedication of the Prodigal Pathways Garden. Her father's book had become a bestseller. David's architectural firm had received international recognition, and their family's story had inspired a new approach to transplant psychology worldwide. 2 years ago, my father and I lay side by side in an ICU, connected by far more than medical tubes, Maya began. Today, we gather in a space designed for healing that exists because one kidney started a conversation 16 years overdue. Richard, healthier than he'd been in decades, cut the ribbon alongside Dr. Kumar, whose research on family dynamics in organ donation had revolutionized the field. The garden's winding paths converged at a central fountain, water circulating, endlessly a perfect metaphor for blood, family, and forgiveness. As visitors explored the space, Maya's phone buzzed with a message from the Denver woman she'd corresponded with 2 years earlier. Decided to donate. First family therapy session. Next week. Your story showed us it was possible. Look at that, David said, pointing to children running through the garden while their families attended support group meetings in the nearby pavilion. Healing isn't just for adults anymore. Sarah approached with Catherine, both wearing matching name tags identifying them as peer family counselors. Their unlikely friendship had evolved into professional partnership, helping families navigate the complex dynamics of medical reconciliation. Next group starts in 10, Catherine noted. We've got 3 families dealing with estrangement and organ donation decisions, and 2 who've been through it and are sharing their experiences, Sarah added. The model is working. Richard joined them, his peer counselor badge catching the light. Just finished with a father-son pair. The son hasn't spoken to his dad in 8 years. Dad needs a liver. The kid is terrified, angry, and still loves his father. Does that sound familiar? Maya and David exchanged glances, the same mix of pain and understanding they'd carried that day in the hospital corridor. What did you tell them? Maya asked. That there's no right answer, only honest ones. That surgery is the easy part. Richard smiled, and that sometimes the people we save end up saving us back. As the ceremony concluded and families dispersed, through the garden's pathways, the Chens found themselves, as had become their way, gathered around a bench, watching strangers navigate their own journeys toward reconciliation. No regrets? David asked Maya. She touched the faded scar on her side, now just a line in her story rather than its defining moment. The only regret would have been not trying. Richard stood, extending his hands. One by one, they joined him. Maya, David, Sarah, and Catherine, forming a circle complete not despite its complexity, but because of it. Ready for dinner? Richard asked. I'm thinking Ethiopian food. As they walked toward the parking lot, their paths diverging and reconverging like the garden behind them, Maya realized their story hadn't ended with the surgery or even with forgiveness. It continued in every choice to show up, in every difficult conversation, in every gesture that said, "This is hard, and I'm choosing you anyway. The sun set over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of healing. Not perfect, never perfect, but absolutely, beautifully whole.